Wednesday, April 8th, 2020, MONERO 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This morning, I want to talk about the rising volatility in the stock market that we're seeing in the last few days. I think that's a bad sign for the economy and the markets going forward. And by forward, I mean next 18 months to 24 months. I think we're also deep into the fourth turning. Some of you might know what the fourth turning is, and I will touch upon that in this video, the fourth turning. And I want to talk about some of the headlines and some of the stories that are coming out about economies, not only in the US, but all around the world. So before I do that, let's look at the markets, see where they are this morning. It's just before 8 a.m. London time. Of course, yesterday we saw the Dow up as much as 900 points, I think, maybe even 1,000, and actually turned around towards the end of the day and finished down on the day. I know it was a small drop of 26 points and 4 points for the S&P, but the sharpness of the move and the fact that it dropped, about 1,000 points from the highs is significant. So right now we've got spot gold at 1647. That's basically unchanged. Range has been 1640 to 1655. Precious metals, paper prices, still very frustrating, I know, but you'll see when I talk about what I think is going on, why it's important to hold on to the metals, silver included. And some of you might have seen an interview I did yesterday with Ron Paul. And the biggest message, I think, from Ron Paul yesterday was that freedom is more important. Even though, yes, you have to try to protect yourself financially by having some savings, by having land, like you said. But if you don't have freedom, all these things become almost irrelevant, even though in my opinion they do help. But as a society in general, I agree with him. So we need to keep that in mind as well. And we'll come to that in a minute. Silver, of course, yesterday did very well early on before the US came in. I think we got up to 1550. But as usual, when the COMEX and the Fed come in later on in the day, we see metals fall so many times. So silver actually towards the end of the day even got hit below $15. Right now we're up 2 cents at 15.02. Very frustrating, of course. But I've been hearing from bullion dealers, especially gold investments, with whom I have a promo code MONERO64. Many of you in the UK and in Europe, in the continent, have used gold investments. They've had quite a bit of supply in the last few weeks. They've been one of the few dealers that have been able to provide the metals. I spoke to Oliver yesterday. He said that they still got Krugerrands, but almost nothing else. They're looking for sellers, actually, to build up their stock of sovereigns, of smaller bars. So yes, the situation is not improving in terms of physical supply, I think. So earlier overnight, or last night here in the UK, I saw the Dow futures was down like 300, 250 points. Just before I started this video, I think it was down like 120. And right now we're up 45. So as I said, the volatility is a bad sign, And I think we're not out of the woods. I made a video recently talking about the Dow probably going down to 9,000 by the end of next year or sometime in 2022. But there are some of those who think it's going even lower. People who have more of a track record than I do, who are specialist cycles analysts like Charles Nenner and others, they see it going down to 5,000. So as I said, this is a dead cat bounce. I don't think even the Federal Reserve and the Exchange Stabilization Fund will be able to contain the sell-off. I think a lot of the pension funds are still holding a lot of stock. A lot of people that have 401ks, they're still holding on to it. But believe me, when people start selling, it's going to be very hard. It's going to be like a tsunami of selling. Not even the Fed or anyone else, any government can stop that. S&P is basically unchanged right now. S&P futures, so is the NASDAQ 100 future. So it's fairly quiet right now. Currencies, sterling a little weaker this morning, 123.02, down a quarter. The euro is down a third, 108.56. Dollar unchanged against the yen at 108.79. Crude oil WTI 27.63, up 3% actually, almost up $1. I think right now the range is probably going to be like $20 to $30, I would say. Oil dropping right now will be a negative sign for the stock market. And what about the bond market? The 10-year yield is down 2 basis points right now at 71 basis points. So today, Wednesday, is the day that the Fed calculates its balance sheet, weekly calculations. We'll have to wait till tomorrow, late tomorrow, London time, for them to publish it. We're going to keep an eye on it. Last week, it got up to $5.81 trillion. I wouldn't be surprised if we go above 6 trillion for this week. So that's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. So I said that the volatility in the stock market, volatility in the currency markets as well, volatility in precious metals. So that's why I think things are not improving. So what about the fourth turning? What is the fourth turning? Well, I remember early 2000s, I had a very good client when I was a futures broker in London. He was based in New York for a big, he worked for a big bank, and a very nice individual. I liked him. He was one of the good guys, I would say. And I think he's still in the banking business, but I used to go and visit him sometimes, business trips. Not too many times to New York. He used to come to London sometimes. And we used to talk a lot about things. He knew I was into gold. He wasn't that much into gold. But he even told me that the bank he worked for, he used to go and inspect the New York Fed's gold vault for his bank. He worked in the Treasury. But he told me about this book, The Fourth Turning, An American Prophecy, What the Cycles of History Tell, by Neil Howe and William Strauss. And so what is the fourth turning about? Well, let's go on Wikipedia and read a little bit about it. Strauss-Howe generational theory. So it says, Strauss-Howe generational theory, also known as the fourth turning theory, or simply the fourth turning, which was created by authors William Strauss and Neil Howe, describes a theorized recurring generation cycle in American history. According to the theory, historic events are associated with recurring generational personas or archetypes. Each generational persona unleashes a new era called a turning, lasting around 20 to 22 years, in which a new social, political, and economic climate exists. They are part of a larger cyclical saeculum, a long human life which usually spans between 80 and 90 years, although some saecula have lasted longer. The theory states that after every saeculum, a crisis recurs in American history, which is followed by a recovery high. During this recovery, institutions and communitarian values are strong. Ultimately, succeeding generational archetypes attack and weaken institutions in the name of autonomy and individualism, which ultimately creates a tumultuous political environment that ripens condition for another crisis. I'm not going to go further into the description of this, but I get the feeling that there's a lot of divide and rule right now, or conquer, not only in the US, but everywhere around the world. And I think the latest crisis is doing that in spades. We're starting to see the dividing lines. We're starting to see those who buy into what's going on, what the mainstream media is telling them, what the government is telling them, and those who are starting to question it. And many of you probably know the people who are talking about these things online. I would say you have people like Amazing Polly, who's exposing a lot of what is going on in relationship to this crisis. Bill Gates. We've had recently London Rio TV, LondonReal.tv. They have a YouTube channel as well, interviewing David Icke. There's all kinds of theories out there. The old adage, of course, is that in times of war or crisis, the first commodity to become really, how can I say, scarce is the truth. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of division. And I think this smacks to me of the fourth turning. And the fourth turning, of course, lasts about 20 years. And according to the calculations, this fourth turning actually started in 2005. So we're bang in the middle of this fourth turning. Of course, there's a lot of critics that don't believe in this, but this is just cycles work, I would say, looking at society and generations, how things repeat themselves. So here's the list of all the turnings, all the generations. So from what I've read, let's say in the last few hundred years, the American Revolution, of course, that was a fourth turning. That lasted 23 years, according to Howe and Strauss. And there's always like a leader that becomes historic in these fourth turnings. So for the American Revolution, it was George Washington, of course. And then you get the second fourth turning in modern, let's say, North American history. Because prior to the American Revolution, there was a North America, but they were the colonies. And I'm going to stick to from the Revolution. So we've got the Civil War. And according to this study, it lasted 17 years, 1843 to 1859. And the crisis, of course, was the Civil War. Who was the leader during that crisis? Well, Abraham Lincoln. And then you go forward and you get the fourth turning in which we had the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and World War II, 1925 to 1942, 18 years. They call it the Silent Generation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, was the leader. And now the Millennium Seculum, it's called. And it's called the Homeland Generation, or Generation Z. We are in the 15th year, so it looks like we could have another few years. So the fourth turning, great financial crisis of '08, war on terror, and now this pandemic, right? I'm not going to use the name. It's silly, but that's the way it is. So who's the leader? Donald Trump. Am I judging Donald Trump? Am I comparing him to FDR, Lincoln, or Washington? No, I'm just saying that you get a very divisive leader. And we might think that Lincoln was a great leader. Some people do. But at the time, there's a lot of division. There's so much division that the country split up, right? After he got elected and inaugurated. Also during the American Revolution, there was a lot of division as well. Many people didn't want to get away from Britain. They're called the Tories. And then you had the the patriots. So George Washington was, looking back, yes, he was a great leader, but at the time it was very divisive as well. And FDR as well, I would say. There are a lot of people who didn't like what he did at the time. And still today there is, of course. So, and it's the same thing for Donald Trump. How more divisive can a president be than Donald Trump? Well, you have to go back to other fourth turnings to see what I mean. So, yeah, how do you survive during a fourth turning? Well, people survived in the past. I think what it means is just that we need to adapt. We need to, how can I say, realize that things are changing and they'll probably never be the same again. And I think that's the lesson of what's going on. So I'm not sure where we're going to come out at the end of this fourth turning. And I do think we are in a fourth turning. Will we have conflict like we've had in the past? Maybe. I'm not a prophet. I'm just trying to look at the past, trying to analyze what's going on, and trying to forecast a little bit to see if what happened in the past is happening now. So I think there's a good chance of that, unfortunately. So let's go into the headlines now and look at what we're seeing in terms of the economy. One thing that caught my attention today is a headline here in the FT. It says, South Korea economy suffering tsunami-like impact, president says. So if you remember, South Korea, in the beginning of this crisis, was one of the countries that was first hit after China. So it's interesting that they're still having trouble in South Korea. And that's why I think the economic hit is going to be a lot, how can I say, more pronounced than mainstream economists think. And I think it's going to last longer. So it says here, South Korea outlines $29.5 billion in loans to support exporters. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has announced another stimulus package worth $44 billion to revive faltering exports and domestic consumption. It's not only the exports, but also domestic consumption. And I'm assuming that South Korea is back to a more normal way of operating their economy than we are right now. So that's concerning there, that consumption hasn't picked up. And it kind of corresponds to what I said yesterday, that I don't think the animal spirits are going to come back once things are resolved. Amid growing concerns about the economic fallout from the widening pandemic, Mr. Moon said on Wednesday the government would offer about 36 trillion won of additional cheap loans for exporters and 17.7 trillion won in measures to boost domestic spending. The announcement comes after Seoul announced stimulus packages worth 80 billion last month to cushion the blow to Asia's fourth largest economy. Mr. Moon said South Korea's export-driven economy was suffering a tsunami-like impact from the pandemic as the global economy is falling into an extreme slump. We are in a dark tunnel with no end in sight, he said at an emergency economic meeting. South Korea's export fell 0.2% in March from a year earlier as the deadly virus hit global supply chains and dampened overseas demand, rising the specter of a global recession. Samsung Electronics, the country's biggest exporter, said on Tuesday its first quarter profit would be near its lowest level in 5 years as the fast spread of the virus across the world batters demand for electronic devices. So there you go. As I've been saying, even before the market started collapsing, in March. This is going to be worse than a lot of people think. And why? Well, because this is a catalyst for blowing up the huge everything bubble we've had since '08. It's a prick that's bursting the bubble of funny money, of just-in-time inventory, of a credit-based economy, an economy based on consumption and credit. And it's going to be something that we haven't experienced yet, and it's going to be alongside a fourth turning, in my opinion. So how do we survive through this? Well, I think we need to think outside the box and try to adapt. You should do your own homework, your own research. That's what I do. I try to keep an open mind. Yes, I do look at what the mainstream is saying, but I take it with a huge a chunk of or grain of salt when I listen to these people. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide. Think about subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, BitChute, Steemit, and DTube. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.